Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome to the World Over Live. Lots to report this week. The political season is in high gear here in the U.S. As we revealed on the show last week, Cardinal Timothy Dolan of New York is set to deliver the final prayer at the Republican National Convention in Tampa. And he's confirmed that he will perform the same duty in Charlotte at the Democratic Convention. Here to comment on stories questioning the actions and words of some important high-profile clerics making headlines this week is the president of the Catholic League, Bill Donohue. And later, former Supreme Court law clerk and current candidate for U.S. Senate in New York, Wendy Long, is here to talk about the 2012 election, the ongoing war on women in the media, and whether women and Catholics are buying it. And finally, we got so many calls and emails about my exclusive interview with Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney that will bring you an encore of it this evening. He spoke candidly about his faith, his family, and several important issues facing the country. As always, if you have a question or comment about tonight's show, drop us an email, worldover@EWTN.com. Let's get started. Here's the brief. News from the world over this week. Troubling news for Christians in several Muslim-dominated countries, starting in Syria. Terrorists have targeted a predominantly Christian enclave near Damascus with a series of bombings. 12 were killed in all, 50 more were injured. And in the town of Zamalka, the bodies of an entire family of Christians was found decapitated. Islamic terrorists are suspected. And in the ancient city of Aleppo, Syria, the escalation of violence against Christians has led Melkite Catholic Archbishop John Clement Jean Bart to leave his archdiocese and seek refuge in Lebanon. Archdiocesan offices have been ransacked by rebel troops. A church spokesman told Fides News that the targeting of Christians is an attempt to start a religious war and drag the Syrian people into a sectarian conflict. And the Algerian daily El Kabar is reporting a massive Christian exodus from the African country of Mali, as armed Salafists with al-Qaeda ties have begun implementing Sharia law there. As many as 200,000 have fled to camps in neighboring Algeria and Mauritania. Christians in Mali have been stoned, whipped, and beaten to enforce the strictly applied Islamic laws. The Vatican's L'Osservatore Romano was among the international publications that picked up the El Kabar report. And Christians in Pakistan are also facing persecution. The trial of a Christian girl reportedly with Down syndrome has been charged with blasphemy for allegedly burning pages of the Quran. Prosecutors are attempting to try the girl as an adult, although a medical report suggests that she could be only 14. As an adult, the girl could be executed if convicted. Meanwhile, hundreds of Pakistani Christians who live near the accused girl have been forced to flee their Islamabad homes. The group of about 300 relocated to the outskirts of the capital, where they built a makeshift church of branches. They've since been evicted from the site. Only half have returned. Back in the U.S., Cardinal Timothy Dolan this week agreed to offer the closing prayer at the Democratic National Convention in Charlotte. This after accepting to do the same for Republicans on Thursday in Tampa. The Cardinal and President of the U.S. Bishops' Conference had received criticism from Catholics on the political left who charged that his benediction at the GOP convention was a thinly veiled endorsement of presidential candidate Mitt Romney and the Republican Party. New York Archdiocesan spokesman Joseph Swilling repeated this week that the Cardinal was attending the conventions, quote, solely as a pastor, only to pray, not to endorse any party, platform, or candidate, end quote. More on this in our next segment. Meanwhile, the Diocese of Charlotte is offering prayer and a little something extra for Democrat convention goers next week. In addition to a continuous Eucharistic vigil planned at its cathedral during the convention, the diocese is offering some messages from the Catholic Church, literally. Hanging conspicuously from St. Peter's Church, right across the street from one of the 3 Democratic convention venues, 2 banners read, "A message from the Catholic Church, protect the unborn, defend marriage, safeguard religious liberty. The other banner reads, "Religious liberty, the soul of democracy." Charlotte's Catholic News Herald reported that Bishop Peter Jugas was personally involved in the planning of the banners. He said, quote, "This is a wonderful opportunity for evangelization." And South Korea's High Court this week upheld its country's 59-year-old ban on abortion. The 8-judge panel needed 6 votes, declaring the law unconstitutional in order to overturn the longtime ban. However, only 4 were in favor. In 1953, South Korea banned abortion, with exceptions for rape, incest, and severe genetic disorders. And an abortion showdown is on the horizon in the Republic of Ireland. This past weekend, Primate of all Ireland, Cardinal Sean Brady, promised that any effort to legalize abortion will be vigorously and comprehensively opposed by the Church. At the end of September, a government committee will release a report responding to a 2010 European court ruling that Ireland violated the rights of a woman who traveled abroad in order to abort her child. Ireland's coalition government is expected to consider liberalizing the country's abortion laws once the report is released. In light of that forthcoming public debate, Cardinal Brady urged Catholics to ensure that their voices are heard and pointed to Ireland's constitution. It equally protects the right to life and for the unborn child and for the pregnant mother. Meanwhile, the Church in Scotland is stepping up its efforts to oppose same-sex marriage legislation in that country. Scottish bishops issued a pastoral message on marriage that was read throughout the parishes last weekend. They also declared August 26th National Marriage Sunday. The bishops reiterated their deep disappointment with Scottish government efforts to redefine marriage. A week earlier, Cardinal Keith O'Brien of Edinburgh broke off talks with the First Minister Alex Salmond after the government rejected the Cardinal's plea for a public referendum on the issue. And finally, on Tuesday, a trio of thieves aboard an Italian train stole a priest's backpack that happened to contain a first-class relic of Blessed Pope John Paul II. The relic, a small vial of the late Pope's blood, was contained in a reliquary in the form of an open book of gold gilded pages. The priest began his journey aboard the train in Rome and was headed to a church north of the capital where the relic of the beloved Pope was to be displayed. When he got to his stop, he realized his backpack was missing, and he remembered that 3 men had distracted him and asked directions before exiting the train. Police discovered the priceless relic a few hours later without the backpack amid tall grass near a railway station. The trio has not been found, but they may all now be considered third-class relics. So, up next, Bill Donohue of the Catholic League joins us to discuss the criticism of Cardinal Dolan's public prayers and press coverage of a priest and a bishop. Find out more when The World Over Live continues. Stay with us.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. From the time it was announced on this program last week that Cardinal Timothy Dolan would be offering a benediction at the conclusion of the Republican National Convention, howls went up from some quarters charging that the Cardinal was engaging in partisanship. To offer his view on this and other news of the week is the president of the Catholic League and the author of the bestseller, Why Catholicism Matters, How Catholic Virtues Can Reshape Society in the 21st Century. Via satellite from New York, here's Bill Donohue. Bill, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with this controversy about Cardinal Dolan. Last week, when Mitt Romney announced that Cardinal Dolan would be ending the Republican convention with a prayer, there were those who said, oh, he's being partisan, this is ridiculous. Now he's accepted an invitation to the Democratic convention. I don't hear too many apologies.
No, it's amazing. You know, Cardinal Dolan is a man of principle, and the people who were throwing these bombs at him on the left and on the right over the last several weeks on all kinds of issues, these are the people who look through life through the prism of politics. They can't understand, it's unintelligible to them that you would have a man of principle who says, listen, the Republicans want to give me an opportunity to say a prayer and close the convention, I'll do it. If the Democrats want me to do the same, I'll do it. He doesn't have a political agenda. Will he fight against any administration, Republican or Democrat, if they encroach on religious liberties? You bet he will. But he was unfairly attacked by these people from the left who said, oh, well, look at that, he's a shill for the Republicans. Then, of course, the rug was cut from underneath them, wasn't it? Because he said yes to the Democrats. Or were the Democrats thinking we got him in a catch-22 because if he says no to us, then he is in fact a shill for the Republicans? Well, that didn't work either. But once the Republicans had the heavyweight, what were the Democrats going to do? Invite in a lightweight?
Yeah, so they too will have Cardinal Dolan ending their convention. Now, there's a piece in the New York Times, Michelle Borstein's piece this week, calling or suggesting that Cardinal Dolan is trying to be a new Cardinal Spellman, someone who sticks his fingers in all the areas of pop culture and tries to somehow use political influence to move things in his directions. Your take on this piece?
Well, look, what Michelle Borstein doesn't understand is that what you're dealing with is a man who's not only the Archbishop of New York and a cardinal, he's also the head of the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops. That's quite a big a load to carry. And he's a man who has tremendous charisma. He is affable, great sense of humor. He's brilliant and he's courageous. And yes, he'll go on with Stephen Colbert as well as he would go on with somebody on MSNBC and take them on. So I guess they're not used to looking at people in that kind of position. And in fairness, I'd have to say, I guess they're right, because Cardinal Dolan is unique in that capacity. He brings so many strengths and talents to the table, it's probably confused these people. But I don't think he really wants to be anybody other than what he is, which is a great priest.
Yeah. Well, I know there was a lot of complaint when he invited both President Obama and Mitt Romney to the Al Smith dinner. Then when he accepted the prayer at the Republican convention, the left came out against him. Now he's accepted the prayer at the Democratic convention, and I don't think anybody's complaining now. Now you see people complaining that, well, maybe he's taking too big a role. Personally, I think it's great to have a pastor in the middle of the culture, raising his voice and preaching the gospel, sharing it, calling people to God. What's wrong with that?
Well, look, he has a lot of pizzazz, too. A lot of it has to do with personality. He's fun. I mean, he's engaging. I was just with him recently interviewing me about my book, and I'm telling you, the chemistry with this guy is unbelievable. He's just a fun person to be around, which is precisely why he's so engaging and people come to love him. But then, of course, there's always the skeptics. Oh, I wonder if he doesn't have something up his sleeve. Oh, just, take a deep breath, people. He has nothing up his sleeve. He is what he is, and we're fortunate to have him.
I want to talk about another. You talked about Cardinal Dolan being a beloved figure, and he is. Another is Father Benedict Groeschel, who's been a long-time staple on EWT, and really since the very early days, in the early 1980s. He's, of course, the founder of the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal in New York that do such incredible work among the poor, the homeless. He's a psychologist. He was head of the Department of Spirituality for the Archdiocese of New York. He has come under some fire for an interview he gave with the National Catholic Register this week. It was to commemorate his 25th year as a founder of the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal. In the interview, he suggested, and there were some pull quotes here, where he said that in cases of sexual abuse, in some of these cases, children are, quote, looking for a father figure. And that suppose you have a man with a nervous breakdown and a youngster comes after him. In a lot of cases, the youngster, 14, 16, 18, is the seducer. He is quoted as saying in this piece. Your take on this? The media has picked up and run with it. It was on Good Morning America today. The New York Times is doing a story on this, the Daily News. Your thoughts on this, Bill Donohue?
Well, I've known Father Groeschel for 20 years. I think he's great. He's an inspiration to the Catholic Church. He has done yeoman work working with the least among us, the most socially dispossessed people, people who are suffering socially and mentally. He's also screened men for the priesthood and doesn't hesitate to tell some people, I think this is the wrong place for you. What about his words here? Well, you could say they're inartful, clearly, but I'm saying this much. He used the word suppose. That's a hypothetical for one thing. In that same interview, which the ABC News and others are not mentioning, he clearly says there's no place for a priest who would abuse anybody in the priesthood. He says they should leave. That's expressly what he said. He's speaking out loud. He said about Jerry Sandusky, the Penn State football coach who disgraced himself, he says, listen, this poor guy, and then when he wanted to talk about him. What do you mean? People say, oh, what do you mean, poor guy? Father Benedict Groeschel is a psychiatrist, and he is also a priest. Poor guy is meant not to be a justification, but it's to say, listen, this guy's got some maladies. This guy's got some problems, some issues, as they like to say today. It wasn't in defense of anything. Now, how do I know that? People might say, well, how would you know that, Bill Donohue? I'll tell you how I know it, because I've known him for 20 years. I've read his books. I was with him last month talking about these same issues. I've listened to his tapes that he's had about sexual abuse. I know what he thinks about the subject. I know he's not going to have anything but condemnation for anybody who might violate a youngster. And for somebody to pluck out of an interview those parts which are inartful in their wording and dismiss a man who's been serving the priesthood for over half a century, who is pushing 80 years of age, who's disabled because he was in an auto accident, and he's maybe not being 100% on top of his game. No, I will defend him because I'm looking at the totality of this man's work. Father Benedict Groeschel deserves better than some of the attitudes that are being expressed here lately. You take a look at the man in his totality, and then come back and talk to me. That's what I'd like to say to the critics.
The National Catholic Register, by the way, who reported on this story and posted it on their website, and it is a subsidiary of EWTN, though not associated with our news department here, they have issued an apology. Jeanette DeMello, the editor-in-chief, said our publication of that comment, Father Benedict's comment, was an editorial mistake for which we sincerely apologize. Given Father Benedict's stellar history over many years, we released his interview without our usual screening and oversight. We have removed the story. Now, Father Benedict has also apologized. The Franciscan Friars of the Renewal issued this statement: I apologize for my comments. I did not intend to blame the victim. A priest or anyone else who abuses a minor is always wrong and always responsible. Here's the key line, Bill Donohue, and I want you to react to this. My mind and my way of expressing myself are not as clear as they used to be. I've spent my life trying to help others the best I could. I deeply regret any harm I've caused to anyone. And I think, Bill, anybody who's watched Father Benedict's show in recent years, he's not as snappy as he once was. Many people don't realize in 2004, as you mentioned, he was hit by a car in Orlando, thrown 90 feet on his head. So he endured a brain trauma. And according to this apology, which just came out, one of the priests in the order said he had suffered a fall to his head the day of or the day before the interview he gave with the National Catholic Register. So this all begins to make sense, certainly to my eyes.
Well, it does. And the thing is, you have to put everything in context. How does this stand up against what Father Groeschel has spoken about on this issue? Listen, he's counseled priests on this issue. He's made sure that anybody who might have a problem with matters sexual should not get into the priesthood. This is a guy, listen, I don't know if I'll make it to 80 years of age, but if I do, and after I get hit by a car and I wind up in a wheelchair, I might say a few things loopy. In fact, I've been accused of saying some loopy things now, and I seem to be a lot younger than that. Look, Father Groeschel is served the church with yeoman effort. I think he's been fantastic. If he said a few things that could be misconstrued, fine. But I want people to read what he said also. He wasn't justifying, even in the interview, what some people are accusing him of. And you take a look at what he's done all of his life, and people will come to a different conclusion.
Bill,
the people should issue an apology, or his critics.
Bill, a reporter called me earlier today about this, and I hadn't heard anything about it. I was just getting into the office. And my thought, though, was, why is the media focusing on a piece that appeared in the National Catholic Register on the website, and sort of running with it? Your thoughts on that? What might be motivating this sort of frenzy around this story?
Well, I think there's a lot of open season on the Catholic Church, and particularly on Cardinal Dolan, because he's accused of tilting to the Republicans. Meanwhile, as everybody knows, if they really want to know it, that, if anything, the bishops in general, up until fairly recently, were in fact the Democratic Party at prayer. That didn't seem to bother anybody over at the New York Times or anyplace else. I think this is basically a kind of a setup to say, look, you got some real problems, why don't you attend to that? And we'll take care of the culture. I think it's despicable, and I think that the critics, the harshest critics of Father Benedict Rochelle, ABC News being at the top, they owe him an apology.
Let's move on to Archbishop Sal Cordileone. He is the bishop-elect, Archbishop-elect of San Francisco. He was visiting family down in San Diego. I guess he had dinner with friends and his mother. He's driving his mother back home, and he is stopped at a checkpoint and arrested on a DUI. So he was driving under the influence. This has been, in the media, played large, and the suggestion being from some quarters, including the National Catholic Reporter, the dissident weekly, that he should perhaps consider whether he can lead the diocese at this point. Your thoughts?
Well, I know what's going on here. First of all, Reuters said that he was driving drunk. No, he wasn't. There was no weaving. There was no speeding. It was a checkpoint. You know how many people can get at a checkpoint coming up here Labor Day weekend? Probably half of New York. I'm just saying this. He got stopped. Okay, he had a few too many beers or whatever he had. I mean, we've all done that. Anybody it takes a bit of liquor probably at one point in his whole life. I'm not going to condemn him because of that. What bothers me is that there are people out there like the National Catholic Reporter. One gal said, "Well, he's acting like an alcoholic because you get stopped at a DUI checkpoint and you didn't pass the breathalyzer test does not make you an alcoholic." And this business about he should show humaneness and humility, that's all because he's moving to San Francisco in October, and he's got his hands full there because of what they do. I'm talking about the sexual agenda there, particularly with gays, is out of control of what goes on in San Francisco. They want to shut him up so he doesn't talk about anything. Remember, Cordileone was one of the leaders on the Proposition 8 business, the initiative out there. He does believe, that a marriage is supposed to be between a man and a woman. So now he's going to move across the bay there from Oakland to San Francisco in October. This is their way of saying, see, you're a sinner too. You have no moral authority to criticize anybody. Oh, yes, he does. And he'll continue to speak out with clarity. And these people trying to shut him up and put the muzzle on him, they're the ones that really bother me, not somebody who, had 3 extra beers.
You don't think this will impede his ascent when he takes the cathedra there in San Francisco at the top of October?
No, I don't. And I'm certainly the Catholic League and the people at EWTN, they need to write him letters and tell him to stand fast, keep your stride, don't break stride, because that's what they want. They want to shut you up. It's the same thing with these people about the scandal we had in the church back between 65 and 85. We don't have anything going on today, not any big numbers. They're trying to shut up the bishops and saying, well, you guys are sinners too. Well, we all know we're all sinners. How many times have I said the Pope even goes to confession? The fact of the matter is that the Catholic Church is the most important moral voice in our society. And every time one of our guys may drop his guard, it's going to be front page news. Meanwhile, in my own state, in New York State, they have an assemblyman who runs his hands up a gal's dress. That's what he's accused of doing. And the Speaker of the Assembly is covering up for him. There's no investigation. No cops are called, unlike with the priest. They're supposed to get a hold of all these people because it is a violation of the law. Nobody says a word, but oh no. Let's see, is Cordileone, let's see, is there any beer on his breath? Did Father Benedict Rochelle say something that could be misconstrued? We'll wonder what he said about that. Dolan or anybody else? I mean, give it up. There's fair criticism, and then there are those people with an agenda. What we're talking about tonight are people with an agenda, and I will fight them.
Bill Donohue, thank you for being with us. You can keep up with Bill Donohue and the work of the Catholic League by visiting CatholicLeague.org. And remember, Why Catholicism Matters, Bill's book, Why Catholicism Matters, How Catholic Virtues Can Reshape Society in the 21st Century, is still available at bookstores everywhere and through the EWTN Religious Catalog. When we return, we'll discuss the Republican National Convention this election season and some hot topics with judicial expert and U.S. senatorial candidate Wendy Long. And stay tuned for my Encore interview with Mitt Romney when The World Over Live continues. Stay right there.
once again, Raymond Arroyo.
We have heard much this week of the continuing war on women being waged by Republicans and the gender gap between the candidates. To discuss is a former Supreme Court clerk for Justice Clarence Thomas and the Republican candidate for U.S. Senate from New York, Wendy Long, who joins us from New York. Hello, Ms. Long.
Good evening, Raymond.
Hey, let's start with this HHS mandate, which is really at the heart of this war on women narrative. Are women voters buying this narrative, that there is a war on their freedom of reproductive rights, their freedom of choice coming from the Republican side, and that somehow the church is lobbying the government to restrict those rights?
You know, Raymond, I have been campaigning now around the state of New York for 6 months, and I don't think they are buying it. I think the Democrats have concocted this whole phony war on women narrative simply to mask their dreadful record on the economy and jobs, which is what women, like all voters, really care about in this election cycle. It really stretches common sense and defies the imagination to think that the Catholic Church is trying to insert itself into individual women's health care decisions or trying to get between women and their doctors or their employers. So it's just so far-fetched that women, A, aren't buying it, and B, their minds are really occupied with the important issues that are concerning them in this election and weighing heavily on everybody's mind, which are the employment situation and the economy.
But there is certainly a gender gap. I mean, when you look at these polls, and they have held pretty consistently all along. CNN has a new poll, 60% saying they're supporting President Obama, 31% saying they're supporting Mitt Romney. Doesn't the Republican side have a woman problem?
Well, if you listen to the numbers, you know, certainly the numbers speak to something, and I'm not sure what it is. It could be more atmospherics. I don't think it really goes to the substance of the issues because, as I say, in the polls and in my personal experience, women really are concerned about jobs and the economy, and I think that the Republicans are the ones who have better answers on that front. The Democrat agenda of big government federal stimulus and high taxes and high spending and debt and deficits and overregulation clearly haven't worked. They're not getting our economy going. They're not creating jobs. So I think it may be more of a question of atmospherics. I hope that some of the speeches at the Republican convention are going to go some way toward addressing that problem.
Well, this week we saw in Tampa, Ann Romney spoke about her husband. You had Nikki Haley, the governor of South Carolina, a procession of women from the Republican side making this case that, hey, we're here, we're in leadership, and there is no war on women. I want to play you a little bit of Susana Martinez. She is the Catholic governor of New Mexico. Here's what she had to say, reminiscing about her days as a young girl of 18.
My dad worked to grow the business. My mom did the books at night. And at 18, I guarded the parking lot at the Catholic Church bingos. Now, my dad made sure I could take care of myself. I carried a Smith & Wesson 357 Magnum. Yes, that gun weighed more than I did. My parents grew that small business from one 18-year-old guarding a bingo to more than 125 employees in 3 states.
And that was Susana Martinez. She was referring to her parents who started a security business in Texas, or New Mexico, rather. Wendy Long, how does that play, and is that reaching women?
Absolutely, Raymond. I mean, as I've traveled around the state of New York, I keep talking to women who are running small businesses and hearing about how tough it is and all the problems they encounter from government regulation and just how they work night and day, and frequently they live in a little shop and their home is above their storefront. I think that will resonate so much with small business owners, many of whom are women, many of whom do it with their families. You know, there's multi-generations involved in a business. So I think it's that connection. It's exactly what I was speaking about earlier that the Republicans need to do. It's not really the substance of the issues that's creating the gap. It's just that Republicans need to show the face of how they can connect with women and with small business owners, many of whom are women.
Now, the Democratic Party, as they launch their convention, which begins Monday in Charlotte, they're going to feature Sandra Fluck, the woman who is at the center of this reproductive rights narrative and the war on women narrative. The president of Planned Parenthood is speaking at their convention. Contrast how that will play as opposed to what you've been seeing with at the GOP convention, and how is this reflective of your own race in New York?
Well, it goes to what I was speaking about before, Raymond, which is the Democrats seem to be focusing on this war on women, and they're focused all on these issues of abortion, contraception, sterilization, thinking that that's really what's on the minds of most women. And I just think that that is incorrect. I think women really are concerned about the economy and jobs. I mean, I was sitting with one mother at a table in New York a couple months ago, and I said, what do you think the most important issues are? And I was trying to see if this war on women is resonating. And the tears welled up in her eyes, and they spilled down on her cheeks. And she said, Wendy, my daughter just graduated from college. She's got a mountain of debt. She went to school here in New York. Our families lived here for generations, and now we're packing up a U-Haul, and she's going to be driving off to Texas because she can't find a job here. And that's really what they were concerned about. So I think that the Democrats are really making a bad gamble, politically speaking, to try to go to these issues about abortion and contraception and sterilization. And I think a lot of women of faith in particular, understand that this whole war about the contraception, abortion, sterilization mandate is not about women's health. It has nothing to do with women's health. It's about a big central government trying to conscript religious organizations into a political agenda, an agenda that violates their deeply held beliefs, and those deeply held beliefs are shared by women of faith. So I don't think it's going to fly, and I think I hope it's a bad move.
We're talking to Wendy Long. She is the senatorial candidate in New York. Wendy, let's talk for a moment. You mentioned the HHS mandate. This week it was revised. The president, by executive order, revised the HHS mandate for the third time in 7 months. What he created this time is something called a safe harbor. And if you read between the lines in some of the reportage, it appears they're rewriting the rule to try to get the Wheaton College lawsuit against the administration thrown out of court. The argument being, if they give them a waiver, a so-called safe harbor, on the abortifacient stuff, because Wheaton College, it's a Protestant college, they have no problem with the contraceptive offerings in health insurance. What they object to are the abortifacients that are demanded. It looks like there's going to be a little carve-out for them, just for the abortifacient business, and also a year window for any other religious organization, a year before they have to comply. Your thought on this, is this an accommodation? Is this what the church has been asking for, and religiously minded and people of faith across the country?
It is not, Raymond. It's just amazing. And, you know, there was sort of a safe harbor, so-called safe harbor before. That sounds like a nice term, but all it was the Obama administration and its allies in the Senate, like my opponent, Kirsten Gillibrand, trying to push this thing through without raising a lot of eyebrows. I mean, it remains fundamentally an incredible violation of religious liberty. That's what it is at its core. And all these little adjustments that the administration keeps making to it are nothing more than an attempt to kick the can down the road and just blunt the controversy before the election. It reminds me of when President Obama leaned over and said to Dmitry Medvedev, oh, just wait till after the election when I'll have more flexibility. Well, after the election, they're going to have more flexibility on this, too, to impose upon the basic fundamental American principle of religious liberty, and they just want to skirt that issue until after the election. I think that's all this is about.
Wendy Long, how do you frame that in New York? New York is not exactly a bastion of defense of religious liberty. You've come out and said you're 100% pro-life. How do you frame that in the context of New York?
Well, you know, Raymond, New York is a state that has a great history of religious liberty, a great history of religious institutions. You know, with Cardinal Dolan giving the benediction tonight at the convention, and by the way, congratulations on getting that scoop. That was very impressive. I think New York has a great place in the religious constellation of our country. So I think it's something that is very important here, and it's important that we make clear what the Obama administration is doing and what my opponent is doing, which is trampling upon religious liberty, which is the very first liberty that we share as Americans. And I think it's very important and will resonate in New York.
Wendy Long, in our final moments, how do you, as a mother, as a Catholic, hold it together, if you will, during what is shaping up to be a pretty contentious and ugly campaign? How do you do that? It's got to be difficult.
Well, it's a sacrifice, to be sure. It's a sacrifice of time with my family. But part of the answer is I have an incredibly supportive husband who has been flipping the pancakes and giving the kids their baths and getting them to school, which has been a great help. One advantage of living in New York City is the churches here are amazing, and I'm a member of a great parish, Church of Our Savior, with Father George Rutler, who's a friend and probably known to many of your viewers. And Father Jerry Murray at Church of St. Vincent de Paul is a dear friend. So we have a great church home here and a wonderful family, and that's basically how we do it.
What are your hopes for this campaign season? What do you hope to achieve through your running, and how do you hope the election and the electorate will focus and turn their attention in the coming days?
I hope and believe, Raymond, that this election cycle is going to focus on the real issues at stake. And I jumped into this race because I believe in 2012 absolutely everything is on the line for America. You know, our free market economy is on the line, capitalism is on the line, the dignity of work, the dignity of human life, our security, our energy independence. So much is at stake in this election, and that's the reason I jumped in. My hope is that we can focus on the real issues because there is such a strong contrast, and I don't think that we've had an election where so much has been at stake and the contrast has been so stark in our entire lifetime. So my hope is that we'll be able to focus on those issues and the American people will be able to understand the stark choice that they're presented with.
Very good. Wendy Long, thanks so much for being with us, and we will keep watching you on the trail.
Thank you, Raymond.
For more information on Wendy Long, visit our website, Wendy Long for New York, all one word, wendylongfornewyork.com. When we return, as promised, an encore of my exclusive interview with presidential candidate Mitt Romney. The World Over Live continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. Last week, we brought you my exclusive interview with the Republican nominee for president, Mitt Romney. So many wrote and called asking that we re-air it that we decided to do just that. I sat down with Governor Romney in New Orleans just before the Republican convention to discuss some of the vital issues associated with the campaign, including religious liberty, immigration, and taxes. He also spoke openly about prayer, his family, and his faith, and how it's prepared him for the presidency. Here's my interview with Governor Mitt Romney. Governor, in 2008, you were awarded the Canterbury Medal by the foremost group in the country defending religious liberty, the Becket Fund. And at that dinner in New York, you said, freedom requires religion and religion requires freedom. Explain that to people.
Well, I think most people can understand the second part of that sentence, that religion requires freedom, because if there's not freedom to worship, of course, religion has a hard time breaking through to the hearts of people that aren't already religious. And so nations that have crushed religion, have crushed freedoms, are in often cases devoid of the kind of religious experience that our people deserve. But the other side of that expression, which is that freedom requires religion, that I hope people understand as you look at the history of this country. The freedom that was unleashed upon the world came as a result of individuals who recognized that our rights came from our Creator, not from government. And that observation led to a bursting forth on the world scene of freedom. Freedom for people not only to choose who would represent them in government, but freedom to live their lives as they wish, freedom to pursue happiness as they wish. So, and in one more sense I'll just note, and that is that I believe in democracies, in free nations, that people have to have a sense of right and wrong, a purpose greater than self, in order for the society to work. I think de Tocqueville, in looking at America, recognized that in America there was a sense of right and wrong. And these things, I believe, are an essential part of free nations working effectively and having a productive and prosperous future.
The Catholic community in this country and people across the faith spectrum were outraged by President Obama's HHS mandate requiring abortifacients and contraceptives to be available to employees. It set off protests by the Catholic bishops and individual people of faith. What will you do as president about that HHS mandate?
Well, first of all, I'll continue to meet with Cardinal Dolan, who, by the way, is going to offer the benediction on the last evening of the Republican convention after my acceptance speech. So I'm making it very clear that the interest of religious freedom is something I support wholeheartedly. And we'll work with him and with others to assure that each piece of legislation we consider is thought also in terms of its impact on religious freedom and tolerance. This is a nation where our first freedom is the right to worship God as we choose. And any effort on the part of the federal government to intrude on religious liberty and to reject tolerance in favor of government mandate is a violation of that first freedom.
Should a religious liberty plank be inserted in the GOP platform?
You know, I haven't looked at the GOP platform, so I don't know what's there and what's not there, but I can tell you it is certainly part of my plank, if you will, for the platform that I run on, which is that I and Paul Ryan are committed to assuring that religions of whatever background should have the right to choose to worship God in the way they prefer, and that religions should not have imposed on them the dictates of a government.
I want to talk about you and your personal faith for a moment. A friend of yours, Ann Madsen, was quoted. She's a Bible scholar friend. She said, "Prayer is not a rote thing for Mitt Romney." When do you pray? And has prayer changed a decision you were making or affected your personal life in any way that you can recall?
Well, I believe that Providence has helped guide me in decisions I've made throughout my life. I pray every day, typically more than once. When I pray, I pray for guidance. It is not necessarily just a recitation of the concerns of each day, but rather asking for help and guidance and inspiration. And there have been important decisions. Perhaps the most important decisions a father faces relates to the children and how to help them in difficult times. I remember one son had a particularly challenging adolescence, and we were finding ourselves drifting further and further away from him. And our natural response was to criticize him, to correct him, to tell him what mistakes he was making. And after giving it a good deal of prayer and thought, the thought came to me to, instead of criticizing him, tell him how much we love him, how much we appreciate him, how much his life means to our lives. And that, as the poet said, made all the difference.
Do you feel God is calling you to this position, to be President of the United States?
You know, I don't believe that God gets heavily involved in politics. So I believe that God's work is to save souls and bring them to return to Him. At the same time, I believe that the interests of saving souls is associated as well with freedom. That freedom allows religion to bloom and grow, and that people draw closer to God by drawing closer to their respective faiths. So I don't pretend to have a religious mandate. I do, however, believe that a mandate of protecting freedom has a very significant beneficial impact on the ability of individuals to draw closer to divinity.
Let's shift gears for a moment. I want to talk about Paul Ryan, your running mate. Watching you all on the trail, and I've seen you in person once and now on television a number of times together, you seem rejuvenated. You seem more on point. Why not campaign more together? I know that defies the conventional wisdom. Is that going to be a pattern in these last 2 months of the campaign?
Well, we will surely have events that take us together and allow us to campaign to groups of people, and they get to see how we work together. And by the way, I agree with you.
Yeah.
I like working with Paul. We have different life experiences. We can each draw on those experiences to do a better job. At the same time, we have to do something that the President has really caused us to do, which is to have to raise an inordinate amount of money. This is the first post-Watergate president who doesn't have federal spending limits. He's brushed them aside. So to be competitive, we got to raise a lot of money, and that means Paul has to go one way, I go another to get the funds necessary to keep up on the air.
This weekend, the president accused you of choosing Paul Ryan to lower your own tax rate. He said, well, this is so Mitt Romney can lower his rate to an effective 1% rate. Your reaction?
That's a little silly. Obviously, I pay a very substantial amount of money in taxes, also give substantially to charity, and well more than 20%, well more, goes to charity and taxes. And I'm not in this race, and I haven't contributed the money in my campaigns and the time in my campaigns to try and lower my tax bill. What I'm concerned about is helping people who don't have work be able to have a good job. I want folks to know that when they retire, their retirement is secure. I want moms and dads to know that their child is going to get an education that will lead to a good job. And I want people to know that if they get ill, they'll get health care that's good and affordable. Those are the reasons that I'm running for president. And sometimes what Peter says about Paul tells you more about Peter than Paul. So I don't know what the president's taxes are doing these days.
I want to talk about Paul Ryan, as I noticed he hasn't worn a tie since you made him your running mate. Is this a rule in the Romney camp? No ties for Ryan?
You know, Paul dresses the way he wants to dress. I give him no guidance whatsoever. But in our rallies, we're typically outdoors on a very hot and sunny day. And who the heck's going to wear a tie and a jacket on a hot day? Just guys like you. That's right, the commentators.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Let's talk about your opponents. Rudy Giuliani suggested that Vice President Biden may lack the mental, and I want to quote this correctly, the mental balance for the job. Do you agree with that appraisal?
You know, I don't focus on the personal characteristics of the president or the vice president. I instead run my campaign focused on their policy choices. And the policy choices they have made have quite clearly failed the American people. We have 23 million Americans out of work today. 1 out of 6 Americans has fallen into poverty. More than ever in our history are now poor in America. The gap between wealthy and poor has grown larger than any time in history. The president's policies have failed, and I step away from the discussions about his personality or character and that of the vice president. I know that's what they tend to do, but you know, this is a time to talk about getting America back on track, not a time to vilify fellow Americans.
They continue to pound you, and the president this week again brought up Medicare, he brought up taxes. If this economy turns around, what argument will you make to the American people? If the economy is off the table and it seems to rebound suddenly?
The economy continues to be the #1 issue for the American people, and whether there's a bump in the road that makes things a little better or whether there's a down bump, people know over the last 3.5, 4 years things have not been the way they should have been in this country. That's #1. And #2, looking at a program like Medicare, this is the health care program for seniors in America. People recognize that the president's plan to cut Medicare by $716 billion is going to hurt current retirees. And I think people understanding that, you're going to find, are going to say, you know what, we need to have a different direction in Washington, and not the kind of robbing of Medicare to pay for Obamacare that this president is putting in place.
Talk to me for a moment about the Latino vote. This is, the Catholic bishops have spent an inordinate amount of time concerned about immigration and caring for immigrants, whether they're documented or undocumented. The president recently signed this executive order delaying deportations for 1.7 million young Latinos. Will you repeal that executive order or leave it in place?
You know, the president actually proposed or said during his campaign that he would put in place legislation that dealt with all immigration issues, in particular illegal immigration and those that have come here illegally, either by themselves or with their children. And yet, after 3.5 years, he just didn't do that. If I become president, I will put in place permanent legislation. I will establish not just a temporary pathway, but a clear understanding of what the course will be for those that have come here through no fault of their own, to their parents, for their parents, and for others that want to come here legally. And I've laid out the plans for my immigration proposals. These will be not a temporary fix, but a permanent fix that will clarify what the future is for people who've come into this country.
I want to return to your faith for a moment. As a bishop in your church, you helped immigrants who were new to the country. You helped couples make ends meet and balance their budgets. You helped unemployed people find work. How did that position as a leader in your church prepare you for this job you seek?
Well, there's no question but that being a pastor, if you will, and a small p pastor, where you're working with people of all different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different economic circumstances, some employed, some unemployed, as you work with those people and try and provide for them a positive path forward in their lives, you understand the very real concerns and pains that people have, the struggles that they have. You want to help them, and that's one of the things that draws me into this race. I want to help the hundreds of millions of Americans who want to see a brighter and more prosperous future, and I think I know how to do that. And I've laid out the plans that would get America doing what it needs to do to give people good jobs and more take-home pay again.
What is the worst part of this for you personally? This has got to be difficult. Running around the country, today you were in 2 different states, 3 different states, event after event after event. What is the worst part of that experience?
Well, the best part is the privilege of running for the presidency of the United States.
I didn't ask you the best part.
And meeting all the people of the country. The worst part, you know, I guess just a different hotel every night.
Yeah.
You know, I probably sleep in almost never in the same place twice. And so you get used to different beds, different pillows, different blankets, different air conditioners, different fans. And sometimes your sleep is not as comfortable as you might like it to be. But the best part, of course, is the people, the energy you get from them.
Tell me, what are your hopes as you go forward at this moment? What do you need to accomplish at the Republican National Convention? Where do you think you haven't connected yet with the American people or with a block of voters?
Well, most people have only seen me in 30-second ads, and most of the ads they've seen have been produced by the president and his campaign and supporters, not by my campaign.
Less than flattering.
So they have a less than flattering image of me, and they'll have a little more time to get to know Ann, my wife, maybe my sons, my daughters-in-law, perhaps some grandkids, other people who've known me over my life, and they'll have a fuller picture. They'll either like me more or like me less, but they'll know who I am, I think, in a way that will be helpful to their decision.
Before I let you go, you said at that dinner I mentioned in 2008, I'm not an enormously religious person. Ann taught me the power of faith. How so?
Did I say that exactly? That's an unusual thing coming from me, because I am a very religious person. But Ann is also a religious person with a great deal of faith and confidence in the future, and confidence that, that things will work to our eternal benefit if we abide by the covenants we have with God, with each other, if we do our best to live a good life. We've made mistakes. Heaven knows I've made mistakes. Things I've confessed before God and repented of, but nonetheless we try and get better. I was once told that the difference between a sinner and a saint is not where they are on the ladder toward heaven, but instead what direction they're headed. And I'm trying to head towards the north.
We have extended an invitation to the Obama campaign and look forward to interviewing the president or vice president before the election. That's all the time we have. The show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Go to RaymondArroyo.com. The Twitter and Facebook pages are linked on the left-hand side of the site. Like me on Facebook or follow me on Twitter at Raymond Arroyo, and I also have the Father Benedict Rochelle apology on the Facebook page and the Twitter page. Let me know what you thought of tonight's interview, and until next week, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, I'm Raymond Arroyo. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye now.